Kevin Costner sees a homeless boy asking to sing a song in exchange for food, and when he opens his mouth, something astonishing happens. The night air in New York City felt different somehow, colder, sharper, filled with a sense of expectation that Kevin Costner couldn't quite explain. He pulled his coat tighter against the December wind as he exited the Waldorf Astoria, where he had just attended another forgettable charity gala. The cameras had flashed, hands had been shaken, glasses of champagne raised in elegant toasts to causes that everyone pretended to care deeply about for exactly one evening. Kevin nodded at his driver, but motioned for him to wait. "I think I'll walk for a bit, Marcus. I need some air." Marcus looked concerned. "It's pretty cold out, Mr. Costner, and it's nearly midnight. I won't go far, just around a few blocks. Meet me at Central Park South in 30 minutes. The streets of Manhattan were never truly empty, but this late on a weeknight in December, they held a different energy. The usual crowds had thinned, leaving behind only the determined late-night workers, the occasional group of revelers, and those for whom the streets were not a path but a destination. Kevin walked with purpose but without direction, his mind replaying conversations from earlier that evening. If you're enjoying this story, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? Subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that will touch your heart and share your thoughts about what might happen next. He had been in this business for over 4 decades now. The roles had been good to him, better than to most. He had played baseball players and postal workers, criminals and cops, cowboys and sailors. He had directed films that meant something to him. Critics had praised him. Audiences had adored him. Awards had validated him. And yet, at 69 years old, Kevin Costner felt an emptiness he couldn't name. His children were grown. His marriages had dissolved. And while he still found joy in his work, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. Something that all the accolades and wealth in the world couldn't provide. Lost in thought, Kevin barely registered that he had wandered away from the glittering avenues into one of the less polished neighborhoods. The buildings here were older, the storefronts more worn. His breath clouded in front of him as he turned a corner and suddenly stopped. Huddled against the brick wall of a closed bakery, a small figure sat curled into himself. A boy, no more than 11 or 12, with dirty blonde hair and clothes that were far too thin for the frigid December night. Beside him lay a crumpled piece of cardboard with handwritten words, "We'll sing for food." Kevin hesitated. In Los Angeles, in New York, in every major city he'd visited, there were always those asking for help. Usually he would hand them whatever cash he had in his wallet and continue on his way, salving his conscience without disrupting his life. But something about this boy, perhaps the unusual offer, perhaps the determined set of his small shoulders despite the cold, made Kevin pause. The boy looked up, and Kevin was struck by his eyes. They were a startling blue, clear and intense, but also wary, like those of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust kindness. Those eyes seemed oddly familiar, though Kevin was certain they had never met. "You want to hear me sing?" the boy asked, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "What's your name, kid?" Kevin asked, crouching down to the boy's level. "Ethan." The boy's gaze was direct, assessing. "You're that actor, from the baseball movie." Kevin smiled slightly. "Among others. I'm Kevin." "I know who you are," Ethan replied. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. "So, do you want to hear me sing or not? I haven't eaten since yesterday." There was something in his tone, not quite desperation, but a stubborn pride that struck a chord with Kevin. "Okay, Ethan, let's hear what you've got." Ethan slowly stood up, brushing off his tattered jeans. He was small for his age, whatever that age might be, and painfully thin. But when he straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath, something changed in his demeanor. His eyes focused on some distant point, and he seemed to grow taller, more present, and then he began to sing. The first note hit Kevin like a physical force. It was clear and pure and impossibly perfect. Ethan's voice filled the empty street, with a sound that shouldn't have been possible from such a small, undernourished body. It was the voice of a trained professional, rich with technique and control that singers twice his age would envy. But it wasn't just the technical perfection that made Kevin's skin prickle with goosebumps. It was the emotion. Ethan sang with a depth of feeling that seemed to come from a place of profound understanding, as if he had lived through decades of joy and heartbreak instead of a mere handful of years. People began to stop. A couple emerging from a late dinner, a taxi driver waiting for a fare, a group of college students heading home from a bar. They all paused, transfixed by the sound that seemed to transform the cold, unremarkable street into something magical. But it was the song itself that truly shook Kevin to his core. Wild Horses. Not the Rolling Stones version that everyone knew, but the specific arrangement that Lisa had created all those years ago. Lisa, who had been gone for over a decade now. Lisa, whose memory he had locked away so carefully that he rarely allowed himself to speak her name, even in the privacy of his own thoughts. This was her version of the song, with the altered bridge and the haunting minor key shift in the chorus that she had created one rainy afternoon in their cabin in Montana. A version that had never been recorded, never been performed outside the walls of that small wooden house by the lake. A version that this boy couldn't possibly know. Kevin felt his legs go weak, and he reached out to steady himself against the brick wall. Around him, he was distantly aware of people wiping away tears, of phones being raised to capture the moment. But all he could focus on was Ethan and the impossible song flowing from his lips. When the final note faded into the night air, there was a moment of complete silence, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then someone started to clap and others joined in. Coins and bills were pressed into Ethan's hands. A woman offered him her scarf. A man handed him a paper bag containing half a sandwich. Through it all, Kevin stood motionless, his mind racing with questions. When the small crowd finally dispersed, he approached Ethan again. "Where did you learn that song?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Ethan shrugged, tucking the money into his pocket. "I don't know. I just know it. I've always known it." "That's impossible," Kevin said, more to himself than to the boy. "That arrangement, it was never published, never recorded." "I don't know what to tell you, mister," Ethan replied, his earlier confidence beginning to fade back into wariness. "I just sing what I hear in my head." Kevin stared at him, 1,000 thoughts colliding in his mind. The boy was clearly homeless, clearly in need. But there was something else going on here, something that Kevin couldn't begin to understand but couldn't ignore either. "Are you hungry?" Kevin asked finally. Ethan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I don't go with strangers, even famous ones." "I'm not," Kevin began, then stopped himself. The boy's caution was well-founded. "There's a diner around the corner, open all night. We can sit by the window where everyone can see us, you can have a proper meal, and maybe tell me a bit more about yourself and that song." Ethan considered this for a long moment, weighing hunger against danger. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, but I'm keeping the door in sight the whole time." As they walked the short distance to the diner, Kevin couldn't help but study the boy's profile. There was something about the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, something hauntingly familiar. But it was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. The warmth of the diner hit them like a wave as they stepped inside. The place was nearly empty at this hour, just a couple of late-night workers having coffee and an elderly man reading a newspaper. The waitress looked up, recognition flashing in her eyes when she saw Kevin, but she was professional enough not to make a fuss. "Sit anywhere you like," she said with a tired smile. They slid into a booth by the front window, Ethan positioning himself so he could see both the door and Kevin at the same time. His fingers drummed nervously on the plastic-coated menu. "Order whatever you want," Kevin said. "I mean it." The boy didn't need to be told twice. When the waitress came back, he ordered a cheeseburger, fries, a chocolate milkshake, and apple pie for dessert. Kevin asked for just coffee. "So," Kevin said once the waitress had walked away, "how long have you been on the streets?" Ethan's expression closed off immediately. "What's it to you?" "Just trying to understand," Kevin replied, keeping his voice gentle. "That song you sang, it means something to me. I'd like to know how you came to know it." The boy's shoulders remained tense, but after a moment he sighed. Like I told you, I don't know. I've been on my own for about 2 years. Before that, I was in a group home in Queens. Before that, he shrugged. I don't remember much. You don't remember your parents? They died when I was 7. At least that's what they told me at the home. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, but his fingers picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. I don't really remember them. I don't remember much of anything before waking up in the hospital when I was 7. I'm sorry, Kevin said, genuinely meaning it. That must be hard. It is what it is. The practiced indifference in such a young voice was heartbreaking. The home wasn't so bad at first, but then some of the older kids, well, the street seemed safer, you know. Kevin did know. He'd played enough troubled characters, researched enough difficult childhoods to understand what Ethan wasn't saying. The thought of this boy, this strange, talented boy who somehow knew Lisa's song, facing such dangers made his chest tight with an unexpected protectiveness. Their food arrived, and Ethan fell upon it with the focused intensity of someone who didn't know when his next meal would come. Kevin watched him, his coffee cooling untouched before him. That song, Kevin said finally when Ethan had made it halfway through his burger. It was written by someone I knew, someone named Lisa Morgan. Ethan paused mid-bite. Is she famous? Maybe I heard it somewhere and just remembered it. No, Kevin said, shaking his head. She wasn't famous. She was a songwriter, but she never published anything. We were close many years ago. That song, that specific version of the song, she created it for me. She played it exactly once in private. Ethan set down his burger, his expression troubled. That's weird. I don't know what to tell you. It's just in my head like a lot of songs. Can you sing other songs like that one? Songs that just come to you? Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, lots of them. It's like they're always there. I just have to listen and they play like a radio in my brain or something. And you've always had this ability? Even before the accident? I think so. I don't really remember, but it feels like I've always known these songs. Kevin leaned forward, his heart pounding. Accident? What accident? Ethan took a long sip of his milkshake, his eyes never leaving Kevin's face. Car crash. That's how my parents died. I survived, but I hit my head pretty bad. That's why I don't remember much from before. When? Kevin's voice was barely a whisper now. When did this happen? August 17th, 2012, Ethan recited, as if he'd memorized the date. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. They told me my parents were dead, and I was going into foster care, and that was that. August 17th, 2012. Kevin felt the room tilt around him. That was the day Lisa had disappeared. The day she had called him, voice tight with emotion, saying they needed to talk. The day he had told her he was too busy, that whatever it was would have to wait until he finished shooting. She had never arrived at their planned meeting spot the next day. Her car had been found abandoned near the Hudson River, her purse still inside. The police had eventually concluded that she had taken her own life, though her body had never been recovered. Kevin stared at Ethan, at his clear blue eyes that now seemed so familiar, at the stubborn set of his jaw, at the shape of his ears, and the way his hair fell across his forehead. The boy would have been born around the time Kevin and Lisa were together. Was it possible? Could this be why she had called that day, what she had wanted to tell him? Ethan, Kevin said carefully, do you remember your parents' names? The boy set down his glass. No. The doctor said that was normal with my kind of head injury. I might never get those memories back. And you don't have any family photos? Nothing from before? All that stuff was lost in the accident, I guess. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking all these questions? What's going on? Kevin rubbed a hand over his face, trying to collect his thoughts. I'm not sure yet, but I think there might be a connection between us. Between you and me and Lisa. What kind of connection? Ethan's voice had taken on a defensive edge. I don't know exactly, but I'd like to find out. If you'll let me help you. Ethan regarded him with that unnerving directness again. What kind of help? For starters, a warm place to sleep tonight. My hotel has plenty of room. Then tomorrow maybe we could look into your background a bit more. Try to find out what really happened to your parents. Why would you do that for me? Because I know some song your old girlfriend wrote. Because, Kevin said slowly, I think there's more to this story than either of us knows. And because no kid should be sleeping on the streets, especially not in December in New York. Ethan considered this for a long moment, methodically finishing his fries while he thought. Finally he nodded. One night in your hotel and I'm keeping the door locked and a chair under the doorknob. Fair enough, Kevin agreed, trying not to show how relieved he felt. Finish your pie and we'll head there. As Ethan devoured his dessert, Kevin pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Marcus, asking him to come pick them up. Then he called the hotel concierge, making arrangements for an adjoining room to be prepared. His mind was racing with possibilities, each more improbable than the last. But one thought kept returning, insistent and unavoidable. What if this boy was Lisa's son? What if he was their son? And if he was, what had happened on that August day 4 years ago? Why had Lisa kept him a secret all this time? And how in the world did Ethan know that song? Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, casting patterns across the luxurious room. Kevin sat in an armchair, nursing his third cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the adjoining door. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been too busy piecing together fragments of the past, trying to form a picture that made sense. He'd made some calls already, discreet ones to people who owed him favors. A private investigator who had helped research a role years ago. A producer friend with connections in New York's social services. His longtime attorney in Los Angeles. Wheels were in motion, but answers would take time. A soft knock on the adjoining door pulled him from his thoughts. It's open, he called. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hair damp from the shower, wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but looking markedly cleaner. The transformation was striking. Without the grime of the streets, the boy's resemblance to Lisa was even more apparent. The same high cheekbones, the same slight cleft in the chin. You sleep okay? Kevin asked. Ethan shrugged, hovering uncertainly at the threshold. The bed was too soft. Couldn't get comfortable. Kevin nodded, understanding. After years on hard surfaces, comfort could feel foreign, threatening even. Hungry? Always. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. I ordered room service. Should be here any minute. As if on cue, there was a knock at the hallway door. The waiter wheeled in a cart laden with covered dishes, pancakes, eggs, bacon, fruit, pastries, juice. Enough food for 4 people at least. Ethan's eyes widened at the spread. I wasn't sure what you liked, Kevin explained after the waiter had left, so I got a bit of everything. Ethan approached the cart cautiously, as if expecting it to be yanked away at the last moment. This is a lot. Eat whatever you want, I'm not that hungry. They ate in silence for a while, Kevin picking at a croissant while Ethan systematically worked his way through pancakes, eggs, and bacon with the focused determination of someone accustomed to scarcity. So, Ethan said finally, wiping his mouth with a napkin, you said you wanted to help me find out about my parents. Kevin set down his coffee cup. Yes, I have some people looking into it already. Why? The direct blue gaze was unflinching. What's in it for you? It's complicated, Kevin admitted. That song you sang last night, it's connected to someone who was very important to me, someone who disappeared around the same time you said your parents died. And you think she's my mom? Ethan's voice was flat, but his fingers tightened around his fork. I don't know, maybe. The timing fits. And you look... There are similarities. To you too, Ethan said quietly. The lady at the front desk thought I was your grandson. I heard her whispering to the other guy when we came in last night. The statement hung between them, heavy with implication. Kevin felt his chest tighten. Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you really not remember anything from before the accident? Nothing at all? Ethan set down his fork, his appetite apparently gone. I get flashes sometimes, like I remember a yellow kitchen, and someone laughing, a dog maybe, but it's all mixed up like a dream you can't quite remember in the morning. And the songs? They're clear. Yeah, the songs are always clear. Ethan pushed his plate away. So, What happens now? Your people find out who I am, then what? You dump me back at the group home. The defensiveness in his voice was heartbreaking. How many times had this boy been promised help only to be abandoned again? No, Kevin said firmly. Whatever we find out, I'm not going to abandon you, I promise. Ethan snorted. Sure, everyone promises. Before Kevin could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his private investigator. I need to take this, he said, standing. It might be about your case. Why don't you finish eating and we can talk more after? Ethan gave a non-committal shrug, but pulled his plate back toward him as Kevin stepped into the bedroom to take the call. Frank, what have you got for me? Kevin asked without preamble. It's preliminary but interesting, the investigator replied. There was indeed a car accident on August 17th, 2012. A vehicle went off the Henry Hudson Parkway into the river. One confirmed fatality, the driver identified as a Maria Rodriguez. One survivor, a male child approximately 7 years old, suffering from head trauma and hypothermia. The child was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital. That matches what the boy told me, Kevin said, glancing toward the door to make sure Ethan couldn't hear. What about Lisa? Any connection to her? That's where it gets strange. Lisa Morgan's car was found abandoned the same day, not far from where the accident occurred, but there's no mention of her in any of the accident reports. No body was ever recovered from her vehicle or from the river. Kevin ran a hand through his hair. So what happened to her? I don't know yet, but here's something else interesting. This Maria Rodriguez, she doesn't have much of a paper trail before 2005. I'm still digging, but it looks like the identity might have been manufactured. A good job, but not perfect. You think she was using a false name? Why would she? I can't say for sure yet, but there's one more thing you should know. The boy, after he recovered, he was placed in foster care under the name Ethan Rodriguez. His birth certificate listed Maria as his mother, father unknown. But I got access to his hospital records from after the accident, and they did a standard blood workup. His blood type is AB negative. What's significant about that? It's very rare. Less than 1% of the population has it, and according to Maria Rodriguez's driver's license application, her blood type was O positive, medically impossible. For her to be his biological mother, Kevin felt his heart pounding in his chest. What are you saying, Frank? I'm saying that whoever Maria Rodriguez was, she wasn't that boy's mother. And given the timing and location of Lisa Morgan's disappearance, well, I think you should get a DNA test, Kevin, as soon as possible. The world seemed to tilt beneath Kevin's feet. He steadied himself against the wall. Keep digging, Frank. I need to know everything. What happened to Lisa, who this Maria person was, all of it. I'm on it. I'll call you when I have more. Kevin ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, trying to process this new information. Then he took a deep breath and returned to the main room. Ethan was standing by the window, looking out at the New York skyline. He'd helped himself to an apple from the fruit bowl and was taking small, methodical bites as if savoring every morsel. Nice view, Kevin said, joining him. I've never been this high up before, Ethan admitted. The whole city looks different. From here. It does, Kevin agreed. Everything looks different depending on your perspective. Ethan glanced at him sideways. That was about me, wasn't it? Your phone call. Kevin hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I have someone looking into your background, trying to find out what happened to your parents. And? The boy's voice was carefully neutral, but his fingers had tightened around the apple core. And it's complicated. There are some inconsistencies. Things that don't quite add up. Like what? Kevin considered how much to share. The boy had been through enough trauma already, but he deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as Kevin himself understood. The woman who died in the accident, Maria Rodriguez? There are indications she might not have been who her identification said she was, and there's medical evidence suggesting she wasn't your biological mother. Ethan's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. So I've been mourning a stranger? I don't know, Kevin said gently. She raised you. That makes her your mother in all the ways that matter. But biologically, there might be another explanation. You think your girlfriend is my real mom? That she was, what, running away with me? Lisa, Kevin said softly. Her name was Lisa Morgan, and I don't know yet, but it's a possibility we need to consider. Ethan tossed the apple core into a nearby trash can with perfect aim. And what about my father? You think that might be you? The directness of the question knocked the breath from Kevin's lungs. I think it's possible. The timing would be right. Lisa and I were together 12 years ago. Huh. Ethan's expression gave nothing away. Guess that's why you're helping me. Guilty conscience. No, Kevin said firmly. I'm helping you because you're a child who needs help. Whether you're my son or not doesn't change that. Ethan studied him for a long moment, his gaze unnervingly direct. So what happens now? Now we need to find out more. About your past, about Lisa, about what happened 4 years ago. And to do that, I'd like to take you to Los Angeles with me. To Hollywood. For the first time, Ethan looked like the 11-year-old boy he was, a flash of excitement breaking through his carefully maintained indifference. Yes, to Hollywood. I have resources there that can help us, people I trust. Kevin paused. But there's something I'd like to do first, if you're willing. What? A DNA test, to see if you and I are related. Ethan's face closed off again. What if we're not? What happens to me then? Like I said, I'm not abandoning you regardless, but knowing the truth will help us figure out the next steps. The boy considered this for a long moment. How does it work? The test? It's simple. They just swab the inside of your cheek. Doesn't hurt at all. And then we'd know for sure? Yes, we'd know for sure. Ethan nodded slowly. Okay, but I still get to go to Los Angeles either way, right? Despite the gravity of the situation, Kevin felt a smile tug at his lips. Yes, either way. Then I guess we have a deal, Mr. Costner. You can call me Kevin, you know. Ethan shrugged. Let's stick with Mr. Costner for now, at least until we know. Fair enough. Kevin checked his watch. I have some calls to make. Arrangements for flights and such. Why don't we get you some new clothes in the meantime? There's a department store a few blocks from here. I don't need charity, Ethan said automatically, though his hand moved self-consciously to his worn t-shirt. It's not charity, it's practical. You can't fly to LA without at least a change of clothes. After a moment of internal struggle, visible on his face, Ethan nodded. Fine, but nothing fancy. I don't want to look like some kind of charity case. Deal. 2 hours later, they were back at the hotel, Ethan now dressed in new jeans, sneakers, and a simple blue sweater that brought out the color of his eyes. He'd been surprisingly decisive about his choices, rejecting anything with visible logos or flashy designs in favor of practical, durable basics. He'd also insisted on carrying his old clothes in one of the shopping bags, unwilling to part with his few possessions. Kevin had arranged for a private doctor to come to the hotel room for the DNA test, wanting to avoid the publicity that would inevitably come if they went to a clinic. While they waited, he made more calls to his home in Los Angeles to ensure the guest room would be prepared, to his attorney to begin looking into potential custody issues, to his agent to clear his schedule for the next few weeks. Through it all, Ethan watched him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes, saying little but observing everything. Occasionally he would hum softly to himself, fragments of melodies that Kevin didn't recognize, but that stirred something deep in his memory, nonetheless. The doctor came and went, the test completed with minimal fuss. Results would take a few days, he said. You don't look like a homeless kid anymore, Kevin observed, as they packed up the few items Ethan had acquired. Is that a compliment? There was a hint of a smile in the boy's voice. An observation. You look like yourself. Their flight was scheduled for early evening. As Kevin closed his suitcase, he noticed Ethan standing by the window again, gazing out at the city with an unreadable expression. Having second thoughts? Kevin asked. Ethan shook his head. No, just saying goodbye, I guess. I've never been anywhere else. New York will always be here. You can come back anytime you want. Maybe. The boy turned away from the window. Mr. Costner, can I ask you something? Of course. This Lisa person, if she is my mother, why did she hide me? Why didn't she tell you about me? It was the question that had been haunting Kevin since last night. the one he had no good answer for. "I don't know," he admitted. "Lisa and our relationship was complicated. We were together for about a year, 12 years ago. I was filming a movie in Montana, and she was writing songs for the soundtrack. We fell in love, but then—" "You broke up?" "Yes. My career was demanding. Her work was taking off in a different direction. We agreed to end things. It was difficult but amicable. And you never saw her again?" Kevin stared past Ethan at the city skyline. "I saw her a few times over the years. The last time was about 5 years ago at an industry event. We talked briefly. She seemed different somehow, more reserved, but I was busy with a new project and we didn't really reconnect. And then she disappeared 4 years ago." "Yes, she called me that day, August 17th, saying we needed to talk, that it was important, but I was in the middle of shooting and I told her it would have to wait." The memory still filled him with regret. "She never showed up for our meeting the next day. Her car was found abandoned near the Hudson River. The police eventually concluded that she had taken her own life. But they never found her body," Ethan said quietly. "No, they never did." Ethan was silent for a long moment, his young face troubled. "Do you think she was trying to tell you about me, that day when she called?" "It seems likely now," Kevin admitted. "But why wait 4 years? If you were my son, why wouldn't she have told me from the beginning?" "Maybe she was afraid," Ethan suggested. "Maybe she thought you wouldn't want us." The simple statement cut Kevin to the quick. "I would have wanted to know. Whatever was happening in my life or career, I would have wanted to know about you. Even if it messed up your perfect Hollywood life?" "My life has never been perfect, Ethan. Far from it." Kevin sighed. "But yes, even then. Especially then." Their driver arrived to take them to the airport, ending the conversation. As they rode through the city streets toward JFK, Kevin watched Ethan taking in the passing scenes with curious eyes, occasionally humming those strange, haunting melodies to himself. What secrets were locked in that young mind? What truths lay buried beneath the amnesia and the lost years? And most importantly, what had really happened to Lisa Morgan on that August day 4 years ago? Kevin didn't know the answers yet, but as the New York skyline receded behind them, he made a silent promise to both Ethan and himself. He would find out the truth, no matter where it led. He owed that much to Lisa, to Ethan, and to the man he once was. The man who had loved and lost and perhaps gained more than he ever imagined possible. Los Angeles welcomed them with sunshine and palm trees, a stark contrast to the winter chill they'd left behind in New York. Ethan pressed his face against the car window as they drove from LAX toward Kevin's home in the Pacific Palisades, his eyes wide at the sprawling cityscape. "It's so spread out," he commented, "and warm in December." Kevin smiled. "It takes some getting used to. No real seasons here, not like New York." "I like it," Ethan decided. Sleeping outside would be a lot easier here. The casual reference to his life on the streets twisted something in Kevin's chest. "Well, you won't be sleeping outside anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it." Ethan glanced at him, that now familiar wariness returning to his eyes. "We still don't know if I'm your kid." "Doesn't matter," Kevin said firmly. "Either way, we're going to figure this out." His home came into view. A modern structure of glass and wood perched on a hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Not ostentatious by Hollywood standards, but certainly impressive to someone who had been living on the streets. "Whoa," Ethan breathed as they pulled through the security gate. "You live here?" "When I'm not on location shooting, yeah." As the car rolled to a stop in the circular driveway, the front door opened and a woman in her 50s emerged. Eleanor, Kevin's housekeeper for the past decade, offered a warm smile as they approached. "Welcome home, Mr. Costner," she said, her eyes moving curiously to Ethan. "Thanks, Eleanor. This is Ethan. He'll be staying with us for a while." If Eleanor was surprised by the sudden appearance of a child in her employer's household, she didn't. "Show it. I've prepared the blue guest room as you requested. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." Ethan hung back as they entered the house, his posture tense like an animal ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Kevin recognized the behavior, the instinctive caution of someone accustomed to navigating unfamiliar and potentially threatening environments. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you around." The tour was brief. The main living areas, the kitchen, the pool area with its stunning ocean view. Ethan remained silent throughout, taking everything in with those watchful blue eyes. Finally, they reached the guest room that would be his. "This is your space," Kevin told him, pushing open the door to reveal a large, airy room with a queen-sized bed, a desk, and wide windows offering a view of the garden. "Bathrooms through there. There are some clothes in the dresser. Nothing fancy, just basics in different sizes. We can go shopping for more specific things tomorrow if you want." Ethan stepped into the room cautiously. "This is all for me." "All yours. You can close the door, have privacy whenever you want. No one will bother you." The boy walked to the window, looking out at the carefully landscaped garden beyond. "It's nice," he said finally. His voice was neutral, but Kevin could see his fingers trembling slightly as they rested on the windowsill. "I'll let you get settled," Kevin said, recognizing that Ethan needed space to process this dramatic change in circumstances. "Dinner's in an hour, but no pressure if you need more time." Ethan nodded without turning around. Kevin hesitated in the doorway for a moment, then quietly closed the door behind him. In his study, Kevin called Frank for updates while he waited for dinner. "The DNA results won't be ready for another day or two," the investigator reported. "But I found something interesting about Maria Rodriguez. She worked as a backup singer in Nashville for a few years in the early 2000s. There are some session credits with her name, mostly on independent albums." "Nashville?" Kevin frowned. "Lisa was in Nashville around that time. She was writing songs for a country label." "Exactly. I'm trying to track down people who might have worked with both of them, see if there's a connection there." "What about Lisa's disappearance? Any new leads?" "Nothing concrete yet, but I did find something odd. A rental agreement for a small cabin in the Catskills under Lisa's name, signed about a month before she disappeared, paid up for a full year in advance." Lisa had a cabin? This was news to Kevin. "Did anyone check it after she went missing?" "That's the thing, the police report doesn't mention it. I don't think they knew about it. I'm heading up there tomorrow to take a look." "Good. Let me know what you find." Kevin paused. "And Frank?" "The boy? He's settling in here, but he's fragile. If this goes public, the media circus would be brutal for him." "I understand. I'm being discreet." Kevin ended the call and sat back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. What had Lisa been doing with a secret cabin? Why had she never mentioned it to him? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the study door. Eleanor appeared, informing him that dinner was ready. To his surprise, Ethan was already at the table when he entered the dining room, sitting stiffly in his chair, his hands folded in his lap. "Everything okay with your room?" Kevin asked as he took his seat. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, it's really big." Eleanor served a simple meal: roast chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Ethan waited until Kevin had taken a bite before cautiously beginning to eat, his table manners surprisingly refined for a child who had been living on the streets. "This is good," the boy commented after a few mouthfuls. "Not as greasy as diner food." "Eleanor is an excellent cook," Kevin agreed. "She's been with me for years." They ate in silence for a while, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound in the large dining room. Kevin found himself studying Ethan's face, searching for traces of himself, of Lisa. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. Yes, there were similarities, but was he seeing what he wanted to see? "Why do you keep staring at me?" Ethan asked, suddenly setting down his fork. Kevin blinked, caught off guard. "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Are you trying to decide if I look like you?" Direct as always. "Yes, I suppose I am." Ethan's expression was unreadable. "And? What's the verdict?" "I think there are some similarities, but we'll know more when the test results come back." "What if I am your son?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully controlled. "What happens then?" Kevin had been asking himself the same question since that moment in New York when Ethan had first sung Lisa's song. "Then, if you're willing, I'd like you to stay here with me, make this your home." Just like that, you'd take in some kid you just met? You wouldn't be some kid, you'd be my son. Ethan pushed a piece of chicken around his plate. "And if I'm not? If the test says we're not related? Then we figure out the next steps together." "I meant what I said in New York, Ethan. I'm not abandoning you regardless of what the test shows." The boy studied him for a long moment, as if searching for signs of deception. "Why? You're famous, rich. You could just walk away. No one would blame you." "I would blame me," Kevin said simply. "And besides, there's still the mystery of how you know Lisa's song. That connection exists whether we're biologically related or not." Ethan seemed to accept this answer, returning to his meal with the focused attention he gave to all food. After a few moments, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "I keep having these dreams, since we met." Kevin set down his glass. "What kind of dreams?" "About a woman. She's singing to me. I can't see her face clearly, but her voice, it's like nothing I've ever heard before. Except I have heard it before, I just can't remember where." Ethan's brow furrowed. "And there's water, lots of water. I'm cold and scared, and she's telling me everything will be okay." "The accident," Kevin suggested gently, "when the car went into the river." "Maybe, but it doesn't feel like a memory. It feels like, I don't know, like something is trying to tell me something." The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Kevin's phone. He glanced at the screen. His attorney. "I need to take this. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" Ethan nodded, returning his attention to his plate. In his study, Kevin closed the door before answering. "David, what have you got for me?" "It's complicated," his attorney replied. "I've been looking into the legal aspects of this situation. If the DNA test confirms paternity, you could petition for custody given that the boy is effectively orphaned. But there are issues." "What kind of issues?" "For one, the fact that you've never been part of his life until now. The court will want to know why you weren't involved earlier." "I didn't know he existed," Kevin protested. "I understand that. But you'll need to explain your relationship with Lisa Morgan, why she might have kept the child from you, and so on. It could get messy, especially if any of her family contests the petition." "Does she have family? I never met any." "I'm still researching that, but there's another complication. The boy's legal status is tied to Maria Rodriguez. If she wasn't his biological mother, as you suspect, but was using a false identity, well, that raises questions about whether she legally adopted him or how she came to have custody of him." Kevin felt a headache forming behind his eyes. "What are you saying, David?" "I'm saying that until we understand the full picture, you should be careful about making any permanent arrangements or promises. The situation could become legally complex, especially given your public profile." "I'm not going to send him back to the streets if that's what you're suggesting." "Of course not, but temporary guardianship might be the best approach for now. It would give you legal standing to care for him while we sort out the longer-term issues." After ending the call, Kevin returned to the dining room to find Ethan helping Eleanor clear the table, despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. "My foster mom always said everyone helps with dishes," the boy was saying, carefully stacking plates, "before she got sick and they moved me to the group home." Eleanor shot Kevin a look that was part surprise, part approval. "Well, I appreciate the help, young man, but you're a guest here." "I am not really a guest," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "I'm more like, I don't know what I am, actually." "You're someone who's had a long day of travel," Kevin interjected. "Why don't you relax for a bit? The pool deck has a great view of the sunset, if you're interested." Ethan considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but I'm helping with breakfast tomorrow, just so you know." As the boy headed toward the back of the house, Eleanor turned to Kevin with raised eyebrows. "He's quite something." "He is," Kevin agreed, "and possibly my son." Eleanor's expression softened. "I thought there might be something like that going on. He has your eyes, you know." "You think so?" Kevin felt a strange flutter in his chest. "Definitely. Same shape, same way of looking right through a person." She patted his arm. Whatever's happening here, it's good to see you taking an interest in someone besides yourself for a change. Kevin wanted to protest that assessment, but there was too much truth in it for comfort. Since his last divorce, he had thrown himself into his work, keeping emotional entanglements to a minimum. It was easier that way, less messy, less painful. But now, there was Ethan, with his impossible knowledge of Lisa's song and his blue eyes that might or might not be a reflection of Kevin's own. Nothing about this situation was simple or neat or controllable. He found the boy sitting on the edge of a lounge chair on the pool deck, watching as the sky over the Pacific transformed into a canvas of orange and pink. Ethan's face was thoughtful, more relaxed than Kevin had seen it before. Pretty incredible. "Isn't it?" Kevin said, taking the chair beside him. "Yeah, we don't get sunsets like this in New York, too many buildings in the way." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sun sank lower toward the horizon. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Do you think she's still alive? Lisa?" The question caught Kevin off guard. I don't know. The police concluded that she took her own life, but they never found a body." "But what do you think? You knew her." Kevin stared out at the darkening ocean. Lisa was complicated, creative, brilliant, but also troubled sometimes. She had periods of depression that she kept hidden from most people, but she was also one of the strongest people I've ever known. It's hard for me to believe she would have ended her life voluntarily, especially if I was her son, Ethan finished for him. "Yes." The boy was silent for a moment, processing this. "If she's alive, why hasn't she come looking for me? It's been 4 years." It was the question that had been haunting Kevin as well. "I don't know, but if she is alive, if there's any chance at all, I'm going to find her. Because of me? Because of you? Because of her? Because I need to know what happened." Kevin turned to look at Ethan directly. "Whatever we find out, about your parents, about Lisa, about what happened 4 years ago, I want you to know that you're not alone in this anymore." Ethan's expression remained guarded, but he gave a small nod. "Okay." As darkness fell, they moved inside. Kevin showed Ethan how to use the entertainment system in the living room, and they settled on a superhero movie that the boy admitted he'd always wanted to see but never had the chance. It was a surreal domestic scene, internationally renowned. Actor Kevin Costner and a maybe homeless, maybe his son boy eating popcorn and watching Marvel superheroes save the world. Halfway through the film, Kevin's phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Found something at the cabin, call me when you can." "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, noticing Kevin's sudden tension. "Yeah, just work stuff," Kevin lied, not wanting to raise false hopes. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." By the time the movie ended, Ethan was fighting to keep his eyes open. The events of the past 2 days had clearly caught up with him. "Time for bed, I think," Kevin suggested gently. For once, the boy didn't argue. He shuffled off to his room with a mumbled goodnight, the forced independence of his street persona temporarily weakened by exhaustion. Once he was sure Ethan was settled, Kevin retreated to his study and called Frank. "What did you find?" The cabin was locked up, but there were signs someone had been living there recently. Within the last few months, I'd say. Nothing obvious at first glance, but when I looked closer, I found something hidden under a loose floorboard in the bedroom. Kevin's heart raced. What was it? A box. Inside were some photographs, a journal, and this. Kevin's phone chimed with an incoming image. He opened it to find a picture of a small cassette tape recorder, the kind songwriters often use to record ideas. "Have you listened to it?" "Yes, it's Lisa, Kevin. She recorded a message, dated August 16th, 2012, the day before she disappeared." Kevin felt his mouth go dry. "What does she say?" "I think you should hear it for yourself. I've emailed you the audio file. But Kevin, it's about the boy, and it's not what you're expecting." With trembling fingers, Kevin opened his email and downloaded the attached file. He took a deep breath, then pressed play. Lisa's voice filled the room, that distinctive, slightly husky voice that had once been as familiar to him as his own. She sounded tired, frightened even. "Kevin, if you're listening to this, then something has happened to me. I hope it hasn't come to that, but I need to prepare for the worst. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I swear it's the truth. The boy, Ethan, he's special. More special than you can imagine. The songs he knows, the music he can create, it's not normal, Kevin. It's a gift, but it's also dangerous. There are people who want to use him, to study him. That's why I've kept him hidden all these years, why I changed our names, why we've been running." Kevin listened, frozen, as Lisa's voice continued. "He's not your son, Kevin. I'm sorry if that hurts you, but he is connected to you, to me, to all of us. The songs he sings, they're not from this timeline. They're echoes of what might have been, what could still be. I know how this sounds, but after tomorrow, after what Maria and I have planned, you'll understand. If I don't make it, find Ethan, protect him, and whatever you do, don't let Lachlan Hayes get to him first. He knows what Ethan can do, and he'll stop at nothing to control it." The recording ended, leaving Kevin in stunned silence. Not his son? Echoes from another timeline? It made no sense. And who was Lachlan Hayes? Before he could process these questions, he heard a soft sound from the doorway. He looked up to find Ethan standing there, his face pale in the dim light. "That was her voice," the boy said quietly. "The woman from my dreams. I remember her now." Kevin rose from his chair, his mind reeling. "Ethan, she's not crazy," Ethan interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger. "The songs I hear, they're real. They're from places that could have been but weren't. Times that never happened but almost did." He stepped into the room, his blue eyes intense. "I've always known it, but I didn't understand. Not until I heard her voice just now." "How long have you been standing there?" Kevin asked. "Long enough." Ethan's expression was unreadable. "So I'm not your son. Does that change things?" Kevin moved toward him slowly, cautious of frightening him off. "No. It doesn't change anything about my promise to help you. But Ethan, what Lisa said about timelines, about these songs, do you really understand what she meant?" The boy's gaze was steady, older somehow than his 11 years. "Yes, I always have. I just didn't know how to explain it." He paused, then added, "And I know who Lachlan Hayes is too." "You do?" Ethan nodded. "He came to the group home once. Said he was from a special school for gifted children. Wanted to talk to me privately, but something about him scared me. I hid and he left. But he found me again, a few weeks later, on the street. That's when I ran away for good." Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. "When was this?" "About 2 years ago, right after I ran away from the home." 2 years. The boy had been on his own, hiding from this man, for 2 years. And now, if Lisa's recording was to be believed, this Lachlan Hayes was still looking for him, still a threat. "Ethan, we need to be careful. If this man is dangerous—" "He is," Ethan said with absolute certainty. "I can feel it, the same way I feel the songs." Kevin reached for his phone. "I'm calling Frank. We need to find out everything we can about this Hayes person, and we need to increase security here immediately." As he dialed, Kevin looked at Ethan, this child who might not be his son by blood, but who had already worked his way into Kevin's heart nonetheless. Whatever the truth was about Lisa's bizarre claims, about Ethan's uncanny abilities, one thing was clear. The boy was in danger, and Kevin was not going to let anything happen to him, not when he'd only just found him. Sleep eluded Kevin that night. Lisa's words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront possibilities that defied rational explanation, timelines that never happened, songs that shouldn't exist, a boy with abilities that made him both special and hunted. By morning, he had made several decisions. First, he arranged for additional security at the house, discreet but thorough, with personnel stationed at all entrances and regular perimeter checks. Second, he called his attorney again, explaining the new developments and initiating the process for temporary guardianship of Ethan. Third, he contacted his most trusted collaborator, director James Wilson, cancelling his involvement in their upcoming project. Some things were more important than movies. Ethan appeared in the kitchen around 8, dressed in the clothes Kevin had provided, his hair still damp from the shower. The boy looked rested but wary, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for threats. "I saw the security guys outside," he said, sliding onto a stool at the kitchen island. "Because of him? Because of Hayes?" Kevin nodded, setting a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Yes, until we know exactly what we're dealing with, I want to be sure you're safe." Ethan poked at his breakfast with a fork. "I've been running from him for 2 years. He always finds me eventually." "You weren't with me those times," Kevin said firmly. "Things are different now." The boy didn't look convinced, but he began to eat, his movements mechanical. After a few bites, he spoke again. "I remembered more stuff last night, after hearing her voice." Kevin set down his coffee cup. "Lisa?" "Yeah, we were in a cabin. Not like your house. Small, just 2 rooms. She played guitar a lot, wrote songs." Ethan's eyes grew distant. "She called me her little echo, said I could hear things no one else could." "The songs?" Ethan nodded. "They're always there, in the back of my mind, like radio stations playing all at once, but I can tune into different ones if I try. Some are from here, songs that exist in this world, but others—" He trailed off, struggling to articulate something beyond his young vocabulary. "Others are from different timelines, like Lisa said. I guess it's like glimpses of what might have been, songs that someone wrote in a world very close to ours, but not exactly the same." Ethan looked up, his expression anxious. "I know it sounds crazy." "Not crazy," Kevin assured him. "Extraordinary. And it explains how you knew Lisa's song, the one she only played once for me." "I hear her songs the clearest," Ethan admitted. "Like they're being broadcast on the strongest frequency or something. I think we were connected somehow." Frank's arrival interrupted their conversation. The investigator looked tired, as if he'd been up all night, but his eyes were alert as he greeted them. "I've got information," he announced without preamble, setting his laptop bag on the kitchen counter. "About Hayes, about Lisa, and about what might have happened 4 years ago." Kevin glanced at Ethan, uncertain whether the boy should hear this directly, but Ethan met his gaze with determination. "I need to know," the boy said firmly. "All of it." After a moment's hesitation, Kevin nodded. They moved to the living room where Frank opened his laptop and began his report. Lachlan Hayes, 53 years old. Officially, he's the director of a private research institute called the Meridian Foundation, specializing in cognitive science and neurological studies. Unofficially, he's been involved in some highly controversial research into what he calls temporal cognition, essentially the theory that some people can perceive or access information from parallel timelines. Like what Lisa described in her recording, Kevin noted. Exactly. Most of the scientific community considers his work fringe science at best, pseudoscience at worst. But he's secured significant private funding over the years, enough to maintain a state-of-the-art research facility in upstate New York. Frank pulled up a photograph on his laptop, a tall, silver-haired man with sharp features and cold gray eyes. Ethan flinched visibly at the sight. "That's him," the boy confirmed. "That's Hayes. According to my sources, Hayes has been searching for individuals with what he calls temporal sensitivity for years. Most of his subjects have been adults with reported experiences of premonition or déjà vu. But about 5 years ago, he became fixated on finding children with these abilities, believing they would demonstrate stronger, more malleable talents. And he found Ethan somehow," Kevin surmised. Frank nodded. Lisa Morgan was working as a vocal coach at a performing arts academy in Manhattan 5 years ago. Hayes was a major donor to the school. According to a former administrator I spoke with, Hayes attended a student recital where he heard a 7-year-old boy sing a song that, quote, stopped time in the room. "Me," Ethan said quietly. "I remember that day. I sang a song I'd heard in my head that morning. Everyone was crying afterward, but I didn't understand why." Hayes approached Lisa after the performance, asking about the song, about Ethan's background. She brushed him off, but he became increasingly insistent. A week later, Lisa quit her position at the academy and disappeared with Ethan. She was protecting him, Kevin realized. She understood what Hayes wanted. It appears so. She created new identities for both of them, Maria and Ethan Rodriguez, and moved frequently. The cabin in the Catskills was likely one of several safe houses she maintained. But what happened 4 years ago? Why did she disappear? Why was Ethan found alone after the accident? Frank's expression turned grim. Based on the evidence I've gathered, including Lisa's journal from the cabin, it seems Hayes was closing in on them. Lisa mentions being watched and running out of places to hide. The entry from August 16th, the day before she disappeared, indicates she had a plan to keep Ethan safe, something involving, quote, making them believe we're gone for good. The car accident, Kevin concluded. She staged it, but why leave Ethan alone? I think something went wrong, Frank said. The plan may have been for both of them to disappear, to fake their deaths in a way that would convince Hayes to stop looking. But something unexpected happened. Ethan, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke. The other car, I remember now. We were driving at night by the river. Mom, Lisa, was talking fast, saying we were almost safe. Then there were headlights coming at us, too bright. She swerved, and we hit the guardrail. His voice faltered, his hands beginning to tremble. Kevin moved to sit beside him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. It's okay. Take your time. After a deep breath, Ethan continued. The car went into the water. It was so cold. Lisa got my seatbelt off, pushed me up toward the surface. She said to remember the songs, that they would lead me back to her someday. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, and they told me my mom was dead. But you didn't remember it was Lisa. You thought your mother was Maria Rodriguez. Ethan's brow furrowed. I think she made me forget. Right before the accident, she was singing to me, a song I'd never heard before. It made me feel sleepy, confused. I think she was trying to protect me. If I didn't remember her or who I really was, then Hayes wouldn't be able to use me to find her. It was an extraordinary theory, but given everything else they'd learned, not impossible to believe. Kevin turned back to Frank. So, if Lisa survived the accident, where has she been for 4 years? Why hasn't she come for Ethan? I don't know for certain, Frank admitted. But her journal mentions a final sanctuary several times, a place Hayes would never think to look. Does she say where it is? Not explicitly, but there are references to returning to the beginning and where we first found each other. Kevin's mind raced. The beginning, where they first found each other. Montana, he said suddenly. The cabin where we stayed while filming, where she wrote that song, the one Ethan sang. You think she's been hiding there all this time? Frank asked skeptically. It would make sense. It's remote, private, a place with significance to her, but no obvious connection to Ethan or her life as Maria Rodriguez. Kevin felt a surge of hope. I still own the property. Haven't been back in years, but I keep it maintained. We should go there, Ethan said, urgently. If she's waiting for me, slow down, Kevin cautioned. If Lisa is there, she stayed hidden for a reason. Hayes is still a threat. We need to be careful. Kevin's right, Frank agreed. Besides, there's something else you should know. I've been monitoring Hayes's recent activities. 2 days ago, he flew to New York. Yesterday, he was seen at the diner near where you found Ethan. He's actively looking for the boy, and I think he knows you have him. The implications were clear. If they made a move toward Montana, Hayes might follow them straight to Lisa if she was indeed there. But they couldn't simply wait and hope Hayes would give up. We need a plan, Kevin said, finally. A way to ensure Ethan's safety while we determine if Lisa is really in Montana. I might have an idea, Frank offered, but it's risky, and it depends on how much you trust me. By nightfall, the plan was in motion. Kevin's private jet was being prepared for a midnight departure to Bozeman, Montana, with a flight plan filed and security arrangements made at the small regional airport. Meanwhile, a decoy, a 12-year-old son of one of Frank's colleagues, similar in build and coloring to Ethan, would be visibly transferred to Kevin's secondary residence in Malibu, complete with a security detail and a carefully orchestrated sighting for the paparazzi that Frank had anonymously tipped off. The real Ethan would travel by car with Frank, taking a circuitous route to a private airfield where another plane, this one not connected to Kevin's name, would be waiting to take them to a small airport near the Montana property. "It's not foolproof," Frank warned as they reviewed the details one final time. "If Hayes has resources, he might see through the decoy." "It's the best option we have," Kevin replied. "I'll take the jet as planned, make it look convincing. 24 hours later, I'll return to LA, apparently having decided the Montana lead was a dead end. Meanwhile, you and Ethan will already be at the cabin, determining if Lisa is there." Ethan, who had been unusually quiet during these discussions, finally spoke up. "What if she's not there? What if we've been wrong about everything?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to the doubt they all felt but had been avoiding. What if this elaborate theory, about Lisa's survival, about Ethan's abilities, about Hayes' pursuit, was nothing more than a desperate attempt to make sense of a tragic accident and an unusual coincidence? "Then we come back to LA, Kevin said firmly. "We figure out next steps, but either way you'll be safe, I promise you that." The boy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you." Those three simple words hit Kevin with unexpected force. Ethan, who had survived on the streets by trusting no one, was putting his faith in this plan, in Kevin. It was a responsibility he felt in his bones. The hours before departure passed in tense anticipation. Kevin helped Ethan pack a small bag with essentials, making sure the boy had warm clothes for the Montana winter. The security team conducted regular perimeter checks, reporting no unusual activity, but the sense of being watched was palpable. At 11:30, Kevin pulled Ethan aside for a final private conversation before they separated. "I need you to promise me something," he said, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you tell Frank. Immediately. He'll get you to safety no matter what." "What about you?" Ethan asked. "If Hayes figures out the plan, don't worry about me. I've got security, and Hayes isn't after me anyway." "It's you he wants." Ethan's expression was troubled. "Because of what I can do, because of the songs." "Yes, but he's not going to get to you. Not while I'm around." The boy hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a guitar pick, worn smooth with use. "I found this in my shoe when I was changing clothes in New York. I didn't remember why I had it until last night. Lisa gave it to me right before the accident. Said it was a lucky charm." He pressed the pick into Kevin's palm. "I want you to take it, for luck." Kevin felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Ethan, I can't take your lucky charm." "I'm not giving it to you," the boy clarified with unexpected practicality. "I'm lending it, so you have to come back and return it to me." Understanding the significance of the gesture, Kevin carefully tucked the pick into his shirt pocket. "I'll guard it with my life, and I will come back for you, Ethan. Count on it." The time for departure arrived. Frank led Ethan out through the service entrance, where an unmarked car was waiting. Kevin watched them go, fighting the urge to call the whole thing off, to keep the boy where he could see him, protect him. Instead, he headed to his own car, where his driver was waiting to take him to the airport. The decoy operation at the Malibu house would begin in the morning, giving Ethan and Frank valuable time to get a head start. The private jet was ready when Kevin arrived at the hangar. His security team performed a thorough sweep before allowing him to board. As the engines roared to life, Kevin settled into his seat, mentally rehearsing the role he would play for anyone who might be watching, concerned guardian following a lead, only to return disappointed the next day. They were airborne for less than an hour when the pilot's voice came over the intercom, tight with controlled tension. "Mr. Costner, we have a situation. Air traffic control is reporting an instrumentation issue. We need to make an emergency landing." Kevin felt his stomach drop. This wasn't part of the plan. "Where?" "Small regional airport about 15 minutes from our position." "It's the closest option." "Is it serious?" There was a pause before the pilot responded. "Sir, I'd advise having your security team ready when we land. The instrumentation issue came through on a restricted channel. Someone with considerable influence arranged this diversion." "Hayes?" It had to be. Somehow he'd managed to interfere with the flight, which meant... He knows, Kevin realized aloud. The decoy didn't work. If Hayes had seen through their plan quickly enough to divert Kevin's flight, he might already be tracking Frank and Ethan. Kevin reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling as he tried to call Frank, but the signal was weak at their altitude. The 15 minutes until landing were the longest of Kevin's life. As soon as they touched down, his phone connected, and he immediately called Frank. "He's on to us," Kevin said without preamble when Frank answered. "They forced my plane to... Land, you need to change your route now." "Already done," Frank replied, his voice calm but strained. "We picked up a tail about 20 minutes ago. Lost them for now, but we're going to ground until daybreak." "Where's Ethan? Is he safe?" "He's right here. Sleeping, finally. Kid's been on high alert since we left." Relief flooded through Kevin. "Keep him close. I'll contact you when I can." As Kevin ended the call, the pilot appeared in the cabin doorway. "Sir, there's someone asking to speak with you. Says his name is Lachlan Hayes." So it was as they feared. Kevin nodded to his security team, and 2 men positioned themselves at the aircraft door, while a third stayed by Kevin's side. "Let him approach the plane," Kevin instructed, "but he doesn't come on board." Minutes later, Kevin stood at the top of the air stairs, looking down at the tall figure of Lachlan Hayes. Even in the dim lighting of the small airfield, there was something imposing about the man, an aura of absolute confidence and cold determination. "Mr. Costner," Hayes called up to him, "I apologize for the dramatic interruption to your journey, but I believe we need to talk." "About what?" "About the boy you're harboring, about Ethan." "I don't know what you're talking about," Kevin replied evenly. "I'm traveling alone." Hayes smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Please, let's not waste time with denials. I know you found him in New York. I know he sang Lisa Morgan's song for you. And I know you've been investigating his background, trying to piece together what happened 4 years ago. And I know you've been hunting him for years," Kevin countered, "frightening a child, forcing him to live on the streets rather than risk being found by you." "Is that what he told you?" Hayes gave a soft laugh. "Mr. Costner, the boy is unique, special in ways you can't begin to comprehend, but he's also dangerously unstable. His ability to access cross-temporal information is expanding, and without proper guidance, it could cause significant psychological damage. You're concerned for his welfare. Somehow I doubt that." Hayes sighed, as if disappointed by Kevin's skepticism. "I understand your caution. Lisa Morgan clearly poisoned the well before she disappeared. But consider this. If I were the monster she painted me to be, would I be standing here talking to you? Wouldn't I have simply taken the boy by force?" It was a fair point, one that made Kevin uneasy. "What do you want?" "The same thing you do. To find Lisa Morgan, to understand what happened 4 years ago, and to ensure Ethan's abilities are properly managed." "Managed," Kevin repeated. "You mean controlled, exploited?" Hayes' expression hardened slightly. "I mean protected, from himself, and from those who would use him for their own purposes, like Lisa did. Lisa was protecting him from you." "Is that what you believe?" Hayes reached into his coat and withdrew a slim file folder. "Perhaps you should read this before you decide who the villain is in this story." One of Kevin's security team moved forward to take the folder, checking it thoroughly before handing it to Kevin. Inside were documents, medical reports, brain scans, psychological evaluations, all bearing Lisa's name. "Lisa Morgan was a participant in our research program for nearly 3 years before she met you," Hayes explained. "She exhibited remarkable temporal sensitivity, the ability to perceive information from parallel timelines. Specifically, she could hear music that had never been composed in our reality." Kevin stared at the documents, his mind reeling. "That's impossible. She never mentioned any of this." "Of course not. By the time she met you, she had left the program. Against medical advice, I might add. She was unstable, Mr. Costner. Her abilities were growing stronger, but her psychological state was deteriorating. She couldn't differentiate between timelines anymore. Reality was becoming fluid for her." Kevin thought back to those days in Montana, Lisa's bursts of creative brilliance followed by periods of withdrawal, her insistence that the songs she wrote came to her fully formed, as if she were transcribing rather than composing. Had there been signs he missed? Signs of what Hayes was describing? When Ethan was born, we offered to help, Hayes continued. Children born to temporally sensitive parents often inherit enhanced abilities. We wanted to ensure he received proper care, proper training, but Lisa refused. She disappeared with him, only resurfacing years later when she needed money. The Performing Arts Academy, Kevin said, remembering Frank's information. Exactly. That's where I found them. When I approached her, offered help again, she fled. What happened after that? The accident, her disappearance. I had nothing to do with that. I've been searching for Ethan ever since, not to harm him, but to help him manage abilities that are far more powerful than his mother's. It was a compelling narrative, one that explained many of the inconsistencies in the story they had pieced together. But Kevin remained skeptical. If what you're saying is true, why did Ethan run from you? Why was he so afraid? Because Lisa taught him to fear me, and because, frankly, his episodes can be frightening. When he slips between temporal perceptions, it can manifest as seizure-like symptoms. Without proper medical intervention, these episodes will become more severe, possibly fatal. Hayes took a step closer to the air stairs. Mr. Costner, I know you care about the boy. I know you feel a connection to him because of his link to Lisa. But he needs specialized care that you can't provide. Tell me where he is and I promise you can remain involved in his life. You can visit him at our facility, see for yourself how we're helping him. Kevin hesitated, torn between the compelling evidence Hayes presented and his instinctive distrust of the man. Something about Hayes's explanation felt too neat, too convenient. I need time to consider this, Kevin said finally, and to verify your claims. Hayes smiled thinly. Of course, I'll have my team forward additional documentation to your attorney. But don't take too long, Mr. Costner. Ethan's condition is progressive. The longer he goes without treatment, the greater the risk. With that, Hayes turned and walked away, leaving Kevin with the troubling file and even more questions than before. Back on the plane, with instructions to continue to Bozeman as planned, Kevin read through Hayes's documents more thoroughly. The medical terminology was dense, but the implications were clear. Lisa had been part of a research program studying people with unusual cognitive abilities, and she had exhibited symptoms consistent with what Hayes called temporal sensitivity. But something still felt off. Kevin pulled out his phone and called Frank again. Hayes intercepted me, he explained once Frank answered. He claims Lisa was part of his research program years ago, that Ethan needs medical intervention for some kind of neurological condition. He gave me files, brain scans, the works. Do you believe him? Frank asked. I don't know, the documentation looks legitimate, but... Kevin paused, struck by a sudden realization. Frank, you have Lisa's journal from the cabin, right? Does she mention anything about being part of a research program before she met me? There was a shuffling sound, as Frank presumably retrieved the journal. Let me check. No, nothing explicit about a research program, but there is an entry from shortly after Ethan was born, where she writes about keeping him safe from the people who would use him like they tried to use me, and several references to someone she calls the doctor, who tried to make me think I was crazy. Hayes, Kevin concluded. She was talking about Hayes. Possibly. Listen, Kevin, there's something else. Ethan's awake now, and he says he needs to tell you something important. I'm putting him on. There was a brief pause, then Ethan's voice came through the line, tense and urgent. Mr. Costner, I remembered something else about the songs. What is it, Ethan? The songs in my head, they change sometimes. Like, the same song will have different words, different melodies depending on what's happening, I guess. And since yesterday, since we started this plan, one song keeps changing, getting darker, like it's trying to warn me. Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. Warn you about what? I don't know exactly, but it's about a man with silver hair who speaks with two voices. In one timeline he helps me, but in all the others, the boy's voice faltered, in all the others, something bad happens. Really bad. Hayes, it had to be. Ethan, listen to me. I want you to trust Frank. Do exactly what he says. We're sticking to the plan, but you need to be extra careful. Are you coming to Montana? Yes. My plane is about to take off again. I'll be there by morning. Good, Ethan said, his voice steadying. Because I can feel her, Mr. Costner. Lisa, she's there waiting for us. The songs are pulling me toward her. After ending the call, Kevin sat back in his seat, his mind racing. Hayes' explanation had seemed plausible, even compelling. But Ethan's warning about a man with silver hair who spoke with two voices resonated. With his own unease about Hayes, something wasn't adding up. The flight to Bozeman was tense but uneventful. By the time they landed, dawn was breaking over the Montana mountains. Kevin rented an SUV, dismissing his security team. Their presence would only draw attention, and began the 2-hour drive to the cabin. The property was exactly as he remembered it, a small rustic cabin nestled among pine trees, overlooking a pristine lake. In summer, the setting was idyllic. In winter, with snow blanketing the landscape and ice forming at the lake's edges, it was hauntingly beautiful. But there were no signs of habitation, no smoke from the chimney, no footprints in the snow, no vehicle parked outside. Kevin's heart sank as he approached the cabin door and found it locked, the windows dark. Using his key, he entered cautiously. The interior was cold, the air stale. A fine layer of dust covered the simple furniture. No one had been here for months, maybe years. Lisa wasn't here. The theory that had driven their plan, the hope that had sustained them, appeared to be wrong. Kevin stood in the center of the main room, a wave of disappointment washing over him. This had been their best lead, their strongest theory. If Lisa wasn't here, where was she? Was she even alive? His phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Frank. "We're about an hour away," the investigator reported. "Any sign of her?" "No," Kevin admitted. "The place is empty. Has been for some time." There was a pause. Then Frank's voice lowered as if he didn't want to be overheard. "Kevin, something's not right. We're being followed again. Different vehicle this time, but definitely tracking us. And he's not doing well. He keeps saying the song is changing, becoming more urgent." Alarm surged through Kevin. "Get off the main road. Don't come directly to the cabin." "Already planned on it. There's a service road that loops around to the north side of the property, according to my maps. We'll approach from there. I'll meet you. Send me your location when you're close." After ending the call, Kevin made a quick check of the cabin's perimeter. No signs of recent visitors, no indications that Lisa had been there. But as he circled back to the front, something caught his eye. A small carving on one of the porch, posts partially obscured by snow. Brushing away the powder, Kevin found a simple symbol, an arrow pointing southeast toward the lake, with a small musical note beside it. His pulse quickened. This wasn't random graffiti. This was a message. From Lisa, it had to be. The musical note was a clear reference to her, to their shared history of music in this place. Following the arrow's direction, Kevin set off toward the lake. The snow was deeper here, each step a small struggle. The shoreline was about 200 yards from the cabin, down a gentle slope through the trees. As he emerged from the forest onto the lakeshore, Kevin scanned the area, searching for what? Another sign, some indication of where to go next. The lake itself was mostly frozen, its surface a sheet of opaque white except for the center, where the ice thinned to reveal the dark water beneath. On the opposite shore, perhaps half a mile away, sat another structure, a small boathouse that had been part of the property when Kevin purchased it years ago. The boathouse, of course. It was separate from the main cabin, easily overlooked by anyone searching the property, yet still accessible. A perfect hiding place. Kevin pulled out his phone to call Frank, but the signal was weak here, surrounded by mountains and trees. He would have to go to the boathouse himself, then return to meet Frank and Ethan. The fastest route would be across the frozen lake, but that was too dangerous. Instead, Kevin began to follow the shoreline, moving as quickly as the snow and uneven terrain would allow. Halfway around, his phone chimed with a text from Frank. 10 minutes out, North Service Road. Kevin paused, torn between continuing to the boathouse and returning to meet Frank and Ethan. If Lisa was indeed in the boathouse, every moment mattered. But Ethan's safety was equally important, especially if they were being followed. Decision made, Kevin changed direction, cutting through the trees toward the north side of the property to intercept Frank's car. He had just reached a small clearing when the sound of an engine caught his attention, not from the direction of the service road, but from the main driveway to the cabin. Someone else had arrived. Kevin crouched behind a large pine, watching, as a black SUV pulled up beside his rental vehicle. The driver's door opened, and Lachlan Hayes emerged, followed by two men in dark clothing who looked like private security. Hayes had followed him. Somehow, he had known they would come here, to this remote cabin in Montana, and now he was between Kevin and his path to meet Frank and Ethan. Keeping to the trees, Kevin circled around, trying to stay out of sight while making his way toward the service road. His phone vibrated with another text from Frank. Here, small, clearing at end of North Road. Kevin picked up his pace, pushing through underbrush and deep snow. The clearing Frank mentioned was still a quarter-mile away, and Hayes's men were spreading out, clearly searching the property. Finally, Kevin reached the clearing. Frank's car was there, with Frank standing beside it, scanning the trees anxiously. But there was no sign of Ethan. "Where is he?" Kevin demanded as he approached. Frank turned, relief flooding his face. "Kevin, thank God. Ethan's—" A sharp crack interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Frank's expression froze, then crumpled in pain as he collapsed to the snow. Kevin dropped to his knees beside the investigator, shock and horror washing over him. Blood was spreading across Frank's chest, staining the snow beneath him crimson. "Frank, Jesus, who—" "Hayes," Frank gasped, his face contorted with pain. "It's not what you think. He's not what you think." "Where's Ethan?" Kevin asked urgently, pressing his hand to Frank's wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. "Harass him when he heard the car coming. Toward the lake. Go, find him." Frank's eyes dulled, his breathing becoming shallow. Kevin knew there was nothing he could do. The wound was fatal, and they were miles from help. "I'm sorry," Kevin whispered, genuine grief welling within him. Despite their brief acquaintance, Frank had risked everything to help them. "Not your fault," Frank managed. "Find the boy. Trust no one. Not even—" His words faded as consciousness left him. Kevin stood, anger and determination replacing shock. He had to find Ethan before Hayes's men did. The lake. Frank said Ethan had run toward the lake, toward the boathouse where Lisa might be hiding. Moving swiftly through the trees, keeping low and using the terrain for cover, Kevin made his way back toward the lakeshore. He could hear voices in the distance, Hayes's men searching. They would be looking for both him and Ethan now. Reaching the edge of the trees, Kevin could see the lake spread out before him. And there, making his way carefully across the frozen surface, was a small figure. Ethan heading directly toward the boathouse on the far shore. The ice. The boy was crossing the ice. It had looked solid near the edges, but Kevin knew the center was thin, dangerous. "Ethan!" he called, his voice carrying across the open space. "Stop! The ice!" The boy turned at the sound, his face lighting up with recognition. But in that moment of distraction, he misstepped. There was a sharp cracking sound, and then Ethan was gone, dropped through the ice into the frigid water below. Kevin didn't hesitate. He sprinted down to the shore and onto the ice, moving as fast as he dared toward the spot where Ethan had disappeared. Behind him, he could hear shouts. Hayes's men had spotted them. The hole in the ice was smaller than Kevin expected, already beginning to refreeze in the bitter cold. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. "Ethan!" Kevin shouted, dropping to his knees beside the opening. "Ethan!" No response, no sign of the boy. The dark water revealed nothing. Desperate, Kevin began to remove his coat, preparing to dive in after Ethan. But before he could, a voice called out from the direction of the boathouse. "Move back from the ice carefully." Kevin looked up to see a figure standing on the opposite shore, waving frantically. A woman bundled against the cold, her face mostly hidden by a scarf and hat, but he would know that voice anywhere. Lisa. She was alive. She was here. And she was running onto the ice herself, carrying what looked like a rope. "The ice won't hold both of us," she called. "Back up toward the shore." Kevin hesitated, unwilling to leave Ethan, but understanding the logic. If they both fell through, there would be no one to save the boy. Carefully, he began to move backward, keeping his eyes fixed on the spot where Ethan had disappeared. Lisa approached from the other side, moving with surprising confidence across the frozen surface. "He's gone under the ice," Kevin called to her. "I can't see him." Lisa didn't respond. She had reached the hole now and was securing the rope around her waist, the other end tied to what looked like a small sledge she had dragged behind her. Without hesitation, she dove into the freezing water. Kevin watched in helpless horror as seconds stretched into a minute, then two. Nothing. No sign of either Lisa or Ethan. Then the ice near the hole shifted, cracked further. Lisa's head broke the surface, gasping for air, her arms wrapped tightly around Ethan's limp form. She pushed the boy onto the solid ice before attempting to pull herself up. "Help me," she called, her voice strained with effort and cold. Kevin inched forward, distributing his weight as evenly as possible across the treacherous surface. He reached the edge of safety and lay flat, extending his arms toward them. "Push him to me," he shouted. Lisa gave Ethan's unconscious body one final push, sending him sliding across the ice toward Kevin. Then she grabbed the rope tied around her waist and began to pull herself out of the water. Kevin dragged Ethan to more solid ice, quickly checking for breathing. The boy's lips were blue, his skin pale as death, but there was a faint pulse in his neck. "He's alive," Kevin called out, but barely breathing. Lisa had managed to extract herself from the water and was crawling toward them, shivering violently. "Get him to the boathouse," she gasped. Fire! Warmth!" Kevin lifted Ethan's small body into his arms and began moving cautiously back toward the shore, Lisa following. Behind, he was acutely aware of the men on the opposite shore, Hayes and his security, but they seemed to be keeping their distance, perhaps unwilling to risk the dangerous ice. The boathouse was small but well insulated, with a wood stove that radiated blessed heat. Lisa had clearly been living here for some time. A small bed, shelves of supplies, books, and a guitar propped in one corner all suggested long-term habitation. Kevin laid Ethan on the bed while Lisa, still dripping and shaking with cold, grabbed blankets and began stripping the boy's wet clothes. "We need to warm him slowly," she instructed, her voice steadier now that they were in the relative safety of the boathouse. "Help me wrap him in these blankets. Then we need to warm his core, chest, neck, groin area." Together they worked to save Ethan, rubbing his extremities gently, wrapping him in layer after layer of blankets. Lisa placed hot water bottles, which she had apparently prepared for emergencies, against his vital areas. Gradually, color began to return to the boy's face, his breathing strengthened, and finally, his eyelids fluttered open. "Mom?" he whispered, his gaze finding Lisa's face. "Yes, baby," she replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here, you're safe now." Ethan's eyes moved to Kevin. "You found her?" "Actually, I think she found us," Kevin responded, his own voice thick with emotion. The moment of reunion was shattered by the sound of approaching vehicles outside. Hayes and his men had circled the lake and were now at the boathouse. Lisa's expression hardened. "They're here." "Hayes," Kevin confirmed. "Lisa, he showed me documents, medical records claiming you were part of his research program years ago, that Ethan has some kind of neurological condition." "Lies," she spat, or half-truths twisted to serve his purposes. "Yes, I worked with him, not as a subject but as a research assistant. I saw what he did to people like me, people with abilities he couldn't understand or control. He doesn't want to help Ethan. He wants to use him." "Use him how?" Before Lisa could answer, the boathouse door flew open. Lachlan Hayes stood in the threshold, flanked by his security team. His silver hair was windblown, his expression a mixture of triumph and caution. "Lisa Morgan," he said, his voice eerily calm, "after all these years, and the boy, Ethan, I see he's recovered from his ordeal." Kevin moved to stand between Hayes and the bed where Ethan lay. "That's far enough, Hayes. Frank's dead, shot by one of your men." Hayes's eyebrows rose in what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Frank? My men haven't shot anyone. We've only just arrived at this side of the lake. Kevin hesitated, doubt creeping. And if Hayes was telling the truth, then who had shot Frank? It doesn't matter, Lisa interjected, her voice cold with fury. You found us, again, but you're not taking my son. Not now, not ever. Your son? Hayes repeated, a sad smile playing at his lips. Lisa, we both know Ethan isn't your biological child, just as we both know what he really is. Shut up, Lisa hissed, her hands clenching into fists. Mr. Costner deserves the truth, don't you think? After all, he's been drawn into this situation through no fault of his own. Hayes turned to Kevin. Did she tell you about the facility fire? About how she stole Ethan when he was just a baby? You're twisting everything, Lisa accused. You're the one who experimented on children, on me, on others like me. You're the one who tried to weaponize our abilities. Abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of quantum reality, Hayes countered. Abilities that, properly harnessed, could benefit all of humanity. Instead, you chose to run, to hide, to waste your gift, and to condemn Ethan to a life of confusion and pain. From the bed, Ethan's voice rose, surprisingly strong for someone who had nearly drowned minutes before. She saved me, she loves me. Hayes's expression softened as he looked at the boy. I know she believes that, Ethan, and in her way I'm sure she does love you. But she's also damaged you. The headaches, the disorientation, the songs that won't stop, all symptoms of untreated temporal sensitivity, symptoms that will only worsen without proper care. Don't listen to him, Lisa urged, moving closer to Ethan. He only wants to use you, to study you like a lab rat. That's not true, Hayes insisted. Ethan, you're special, unique. Your ability to access multiple timelines simultaneously is unprecedented, but it's also dangerous, to you and potentially to others. Let me help you. Let me show you how to control it, not be controlled by it. Kevin watched as Ethan's gaze moved between Lisa and Hayes, confusion and fear evident in his young face. Whatever the truth was about his condition, the boy was clearly suffering, torn between the woman who had raised him and the man who claimed to be able to help him. Enough, Kevin said, his voice cutting through the tension. This ends now. Hayes, you and your men are going to leave. We'll discuss Ethan's future when he's recovered, not while he's traumatized and half-frozen. Hayes hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave empty-handed after coming so close to his goal. This isn't over, Mr. Costner. The boy's condition will worsen. When it does, you'll understand that I'm the only one who can help him. Maybe, Kevin acknowledged, but that will be Ethan's choice to make when he's ready, not yours, not mine, not even Lisa's. Something in Kevin's tone, the absolute certainty, the unwavering resolve, seemed to give Hayes pause. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Very well, but I'll leave you with this thought. Ask Lisa about August 17th, 2012. Ask her what really happened that day and why she's been hiding for 4 years. He turned to go, then added, and ask her about the other children, the ones like Ethan. With that cryptic statement, Hayes departed, his security team following behind. The sound of vehicles starting up and driving away confirmed their retreat, at least for now. Lisa sagged against the wall, the strength that had sustained her during the confrontation ebbing away. He'll be back, she whispered. He never gives up. Kevin moved to her side, supporting her as she trembled. Lisa, what did he mean? About August 17th? About other children? She looked up at him. Her eyes, the same startling blue as Ethan's, filled with a mixture of defiance and resignation. It's complicated, Kevin, more complicated than you can imagine. Try me. His voice was gentle but firm. After everything that's happened, I think I deserve the truth. We all do. From the bed, Ethan spoke up. It's okay, Mom. You can tell. Him. He helped me when no one else would. He protected me from Hayes. We can trust him. Lisa looked at her son, this child who wasn't biologically hers but who she clearly loved with every fiber of her being, and nodded slowly. You're right. It's time. She moved to sit on the edge of Ethan's bed, taking his hand in hers. Kevin pulled up the room's only chair, preparing himself for whatever revelation was coming. What Hayes said is partially true, Lisa began. I did work for him at the Meridian Foundation, but not as a research subject, at least not initially. I was hired as a music therapist, working with children who had unusual neurological conditions. Children who, Hayes claimed, experienced reality differently than most people. Children like Ethan, Kevin surmised. Yes, though I didn't know it at first. I thought I was helping them, using music to manage what Hayes described as seizure-like episodes. But over time I began to notice patterns. The children responded to certain musical progressions in ways that defied explanation. They could anticipate melodies they'd never heard before. Some could even reproduce compositions that hadn't been written yet. From other timelines, Kevin said, remembering Lisa's recording. She nodded. Exactly. I started experiencing it, myself, hearing songs that didn't exist, feeling connections to places and times I'd never been. Hayes called it temporal sensitivity, the ability to perceive information from parallel realities. He claimed it was a natural evolutionary development, just extremely rare. And he was studying it, using these children to study it. Yes, but his methods were extreme, invasive. He believed the ability could be enhanced, controlled. The children were subjected to all sorts of experiments: sensory deprivation, electrical stimulation of the brain, experimental drugs. Some of them, didn't survive the procedures. Kevin felt sick. And Ethan, was he one of these children? Lisa's expression darkened. Ethan was special, even among the special children. His sensitivity was off the charts. Hayes became obsessed with him, convinced he was the key to something bigger. He wanted to try a new procedure, one so risky even his own medical team objected. So you took him, Kevin concluded. You rescued him. Yes, there was a fire at the facility. I set it as a distraction. I took Ethan and ran, created new identities for us. Maria and Ethan Rodriguez were born that day. And August 17th, 2012? The accident? Lisa's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. Hayes found us. He always found us eventually. I knew we couldn't keep running forever. So I formulated a plan, stage our deaths in a way that would be convincing enough that Hayes would stop looking. But something went wrong, Ethan said softly. The other car. It wasn't part of the plan. No, Lisa agreed. Someone ran us off the road. I never saw who. When the car hit the water, I managed to get Ethan out, but I was trapped. By the time I freed myself, emergency services had arrived. They'd already taken Ethan away. I heard them pronounce Maria Rodriguez dead at the scene. So you let them? Believe you had died, Kevin said. But why didn't you go back for Ethan once you recovered? Because Hayes was watching. He suspected something wasn't right about the accident. If I'd shown up at the hospital, he would have had us both. So I waited, bided my time. I came here to the one place I thought he wouldn't look, the cabin where you and I had stayed years. Hago? The place where I first realized I had this ability. When you wrote that song, Kevin remembered, the one Ethan sang in New York. Yes, it was the first time I consciously channeled music from another timeline. I didn't understand what was happening then, but the song came to me fully formed, a version of Wild Horses that had never been recorded in our reality. But why didn't you contact me? Kevin asked, the question that had been burning in him since this all began. Even after you realized Ethan was safe from Hayes, why stay hidden for 4 years? Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Because I was protecting you too, Kevin. Hayes would use anyone, hurt anyone to get what he wants. If he knew you had a connection to me, he would have used you to find me. And then when Ethan ran away from the group home, went off the grid, I lost track of him. I've been searching for 2 years, trying to find him without exposing myself. And then I found him instead, Kevin said. Or he found me. Not by accident, Ethan interjected. The songs led me to you. They kept playing your name over and over, like they knew you were the connection between me and Mom. Kevin thought about the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Ethan appearing on that, New York Street, singing Lisa's impossible song, the investigation that led them here to Montana. Coincidence? Or something more? Something connected to the abilities Lisa and Ethan shared? What happens now? he asked finally. Hayes knows you're both alive. He knows you're here. We run again, Lisa said simply. Find new identities, new hiding places. No, Ethan protested, his voice stronger now. I'm tired of running. Tired. Of being afraid all the time. Ethan, Hayes is dangerous. I know he is, but so is this. The boy tapped his temple. The songs, the visions, they're getting stronger, Mum. Sometimes I can't tell what's real and what's from another timeline. Hayes is right about that much, at least. Lisa looked stricken. You can't be suggesting we go with him. No, but maybe we stop running. Maybe we find another way to deal with this, to understand it. Kevin had been listening intently, an idea forming in his mind. What if there was a third option? Not running, not surrendering to Hayes, but something else entirely. Both Lisa and Ethan turned to him, curiosity in their matching blue eyes. I have resources, connections, people I trust completely. We could assemble our own team, doctors, researchers, people who could help Ethan understand and control his abilities without exploiting him. Hayes would never allow it, Lisa argued. He believes Ethan belongs to him, to his research. Hayes doesn't have a choice, Kevin replied, a new determination in his voice. He has no legal claim to either of you. And if he tries to press the issue, I'm pretty sure the authorities would be very interested in his experimental procedures on children. You'd do that? Lisa asked, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. You'd help us stand against him? I would. I will. Kevin moved to sit on Ethan's other side, completing their small circle. These past few days, searching for answers, protecting Ethan, it's woken something in me that I thought was gone. A purpose, a connection to something bigger than myself. The songs, Ethan said with quiet certainty. You can hear them too, can't you? Not like me or Mom, but you feel them. Kevin considered this. He'd always been drawn to music, to stories, to the intangible connections between people. Was that a shadow of what Lisa and Ethan experienced? A faint echo of their ability to perceive multiple realities? Maybe, he acknowledged, or maybe I just recognize something extraordinary when I see it. Either way, I'm in this with you both now, if you'll have me. Lisa reached across Ethan to take Kevin's hand, forming a bridge with the boy in the middle. Thank you, she whispered, for finding him, for believing in us. So what's the plan? Ethan asked, his natural practicality asserting itself even in this emotional moment. So's to my. How do we stop running without letting Hayes win? First, we get you both somewhere safe, Kevin replied. I have a property in Colorado, remote, secure, off the grid. We'll go there while we assemble the right team of people to help us understand your abilities. And Hayes? Lisa pressed. He won't just let us go. No, he won't, Kevin agreed, but he also won't risk exposure. If we make it clear that any move against us will result in his entire operation being revealed to the authorities, he'll have to keep his distance, at least for a while. It wasn't a perfect solution. Hayes would remain a threat, possibly for years to come. But it was a beginning, a chance to stop running and start living, to understand the extraordinary gift that connected Lisa and Ethan to other realities, other possibilities. As they made preparations to leave the boathouse, Kevin found himself thinking about the strange journey that had brought them to this point. A random encounter on a New York street that wasn't random at all. A song that shouldn't exist, but did. A connection that transcended conventional understanding of time and reality. Kevin, Lisa's voice pulled him from his thoughts. There's something else you should know about that night in Montana, when I played that song for you. He turned to face her, curious. What about it? In another timeline, one I can sometimes glimpse, we didn't part ways after that project. We stayed together, built a life. Her voice softened. Had a son. The implication hit him like a physical force. Are you saying Ethan isn't your biological son in this reality, but in another, he might have been? I think that's why. He was drawn to you. Why the songs led him to you specifically. In some other version of our lives, you're his father. Kevin looked at Ethan, who was gathering the few possessions Lisa had accumulated during her years in hiding. The boy who had appeared from nowhere, singing a song that shouldn't exist. The boy who had changed everything. Does he know? Lisa nodded. He senses it. The connections between timelines are strongest with people who are important in multiple realities. That's how the sensitivity works. That's why I recognized you, Ethan called from across the room, his hearing apparently sharper than they realized. Not from TV or movies, from the songs, from the other place where you're my dad. The simple statement, delivered with a child's matter-of-fact acceptance of the inexplicable, brought unexpected tears to Kevin's eyes. He had spent years building walls around himself, focusing on his career rather than the connections that truly mattered. And now, through some cosmic quirk of quantum reality, he had been given a second chance. Not to be Ethan's father in the conventional sense. Biology and circumstances had determined otherwise in this timeline, but to be something equally important. A protector, a guide, a fixed point in the lives of two extraordinary individuals who saw reality through a different lens than most. As they left the boathouse, stepping into the bright Montana winter day, Kevin felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of absolute rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. Whether it was fate, quantum mechanics, or simple human connection that had brought them together didn't matter. What mattered was the road ahead, challenging and uncertain, but faced together. What mattered was the boy walking beside him, with his impossible gift and resilient spirit. What mattered was the woman who had risked everything to protect her son, who had hidden away for years rather than let him become a laboratory experiment. The songs of other timelines had brought them here, to this moment, to this reality. And in this reality they would write their own song, one of courage, of family forged through choice rather than blood, of a future free from fear. It wouldn't be easy. Hayes was still out there, still determined to access Ethan's unique abilities for his own purposes. The mystery of Frank's murder remained unsolved, and Ethan's growing sensitivity to multiple timelines presented challenges. They were only beginning to understand. But as Kevin looked at Lisa and Ethan, his unexpected family, his second chance, he knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. And somehow, despite everything, that knowledge felt like coming home.